Let's continue. We're going to see the verdict of the murder of Sunny Bell. This is the murder of a child, I believe.
The jury in the death of Sunny Bell murder trial has reached a verdict. 5 men are accused of killing the 4-year-old little girl during a drive-by shooting, but the defense claims there's no way of telling who fired that fatal shot. Now, this is a live picture of the courtroom. You can see defendants, people are starting to gather for the reading of the verdict. We're going to keep an eye on that. We're going to keep
basically,
that up so you can see.
The whole premise was they were trying to figure out who shot the final shot that ended the life of this 4-year-old, right? Because in that sense, they are pretty much going to get the maximum sentence, versus the other people who are just accomplices, right?
See what's going on. Of course, as soon as the judge comes into that courtroom to get started, we're going to interrupt.
But I mean, even then, regardless of that, all these people are
still with us. Gabriel,
right, they're probably going to get
Sanchez, and
fucked
Philip
up, right?
Dubé. Let me
these
start
people
with
were
you,
the
Gabriel. Again, this verdict form I just was looking at with you, and I love my producer left it for me walking in here because it's multiple pages front and back. You have multiple counts, multiple defendants, along with enhancements. Did they carry a firearm, possess a firearm, discharge a firearm?
Correct.
This in and of itself can be confusing.
Oh, definitely. I mean, just looking at that as a licensed attorney, California and New York, that was confusing to me. And I think I just asked you some questions as a judge that I was like, does this look confusing to me? Or so that's the thing people have to consider when juries are going back there with these instructions. If it's not clear, they can get confused and read into the law a lot. I'm sure you've seen in your trials that
correct.
sometimes they just
right. These jury instructions that they're given, it's all legal. It's all legal wording.
Yeah,
right. And all the legal wording is not.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
It's not easy
agree
on
with you. Now, I've just learned
normal
that there's a
citizens
large
who
police presence
might not be
gathering
accustomed
there in
to
the courtroom.
law,
You can
right?
see a few of them on that
or just
screen.
certain
Again, that is a live
right
shot
terminology
of the courtroom as we're waiting for the judge to come in. Wow, that is a large police presence. Look at all of them. You can see them all lined up. Now, again, there are 5 defendants, so there are going to be a lot of people in the courtroom, a lot of security, depending on what the verdict is, that's going to be needed. Philip Dubé, let me turn to you. Please, sir, tell us what you think, especially knowing the jury came back with some questions that were very specific earlier today, very specific about what do we do if there are 11 jurors who think this and the other one says no, they didn't do it on some of the charges, things that indicated possibly hung on different charges. Now we understand there's a verdict.
I'm actually proud of this jury. They took their obligation pretty seriously. They were out for over 14 hours. That is a lengthy period of time. Particularly
that's basically
when you have
like
5
a day.
co-defendants, and it sounds
and
looks
that's
as
2
if
days,
they took
basically.
their deliberations quite seriously and gave each co-defendant their individual due consideration in deciding whether or not there was enough evidence as to each defendant. It's normal for juries to have questions, and sometimes there's really no rhyme or reason to what they're asking, and sometimes you can kind of decipher clues from the questions thinking, either you're ahead of the game or you need to tell your client to run for the hills. And I've learned that generally speaking, that you really cannot assess a jury's determination based on the questions. It's actually a rare bird when I was right on in interpreting their question. But it sounds like there is going to be a verdict as to all 5 and that there is no deadlock as to any of them.
That does. It sounds like that to me too, and I'm a little bit surprised. Let me ask each of you, and again, if I interrupt, it's only because court is starting. But Philip, let me start with you. In terms, I had such a good question. I just lost it. It just flew out of my head. I know what it was. Philip, in terms of all 5 being tried together, we know the judge made a decision, heard arguments that they would be tried together, judicial economy, efficiency, etc. If you were representing one of those defendants, would that bother you?
Yes, it would. And the reason why is that old expression, hand for one, hand for all. The jury just might throw their hands up in the air and say, look, if one was in on it, all five
Oh,
had to
yeah,
have known.
exactly.
You see 3 or 4 of them putting on masks, 1 or 2 of them getting in a car with that firepower.
I mean, they're
How could all
accomplices at that
5
point,
not
right?
know
I mean,
that
they're
there
gonna,
were up
right,
to no
the
good
jury's
event
gonna interpret that
violence
as
was
their
afoot.
accomplices.
So I think that's problematic.
At a
I
base
would
level,
rather
right?
have all co-defendants
Because,
severed,
right,
each have their own
ended
trial
up with
separately
one
to
person,
ensure
right, one little
100%
girl
sort of
being killed,
accuracy
right?
by the jury. Otherwise,
Sorry, there
you
was a
run the
fly.
risk of them just lumping everyone together, just like the court is doing for efficiency's sake. And I think that the right to due process should be an individualized assessment and not a group one, merely to save time and money.
Yeah, and Gabriel, I want to ask you about that, but also I want you to weigh in on some of the emotional testimony that we heard in this case. Specifically, let's listen together, the mother, as she was recalling the night of the shooting.
Before the vehicle stopped, was Suni sleeping in the back?
Yes, she was asleep.
Were you able to hear when the vehicle stopped or after the vehicle stopped any noises that you recognized?
She just kept saying, Mommy.
Uh-oh.
Emotional testimony,
No,
Gabriel,
no.
and talk about the fact
Did
that
not
all
wanna
five
ask
tried
that
together.
question.
But at the heart of this is the death, the shooting of a 4-year-old little girl. Is the jury going to be compassionate to that, to weigh the evidence against the defendants?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
You heard
angry
that.
jurors are scary. They're a scary thing. In a civil trial, angry jurors are, that's when they punish someone. You hear those big money verdicts. And in this situation, I share the same opinion as far as our co-guest.
And let me interrupt. I'm so sorry. I understand we have audio. They're in the courtroom. We just saw Zavante come in. Let's go in together.
I'm sorry. We had to cut you off because they came in. You're probably gonna say nothing that great anyway. I'm kidding. I'm being a me. Alright, let's see what we got. Let's speed it up. Probably
All
speed it
rise for the jurors. Please back, y'all may be seated. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my understanding is that you all have reached a verdict?
Yes, gentlemen.
And you are the foreman, sir? If you could hand that verdict form to one of the deputies. Right, sir.
You're gonna speed it up just a little bit. All right. So I was reading over the verdict form, checking if everything's all filled in and whatnot. Double checking.
Madam Clerk, if you would publish the verdict form.
State of Florida versus Quandarius Hammond, Zavante Sampson, Jalen Bedward, Andrew
Here it
Thompson,
goes.
and James Dennison. Verdict form: we, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment as to Quandarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of Sonny
Oh,
Bell,
shit.
as charged.
There it
and
was. First
did the
degree.
defendant personally carry, display, use, threaten, or attempt to use a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes. We, the jury, find as follows
There it
as to count
is.
1 of the indictment as to
Yes,
Devontae
on
Sampson.
all
The
accounts,
defendant is
guilty.
guilty of first-degree premeditated murder of
On the
Sunny
first
Bell as
count.
charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment as to Jalen Bedward. The defendant is guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of
Oh
Sunny Bell
shit, there's
as
another
charged.
one, guilty.
We, the jury, find as follows as
First
to count 1
degree.
of the indictment as to Andrew Thompson. The defendant is guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of Sunny Bell as charged. And did the defendant personally carry, display, use, threaten, or attempt to use a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes.
There it is.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment as to James Denson. The defendant is guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder as charged.
Shit.
And did the
That's
defendant
3,
personally carry,
all
display,
guilty.
use,
That's
threaten, or
3
attempt
now.
to use a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm?
He's nodding,
Yes.
he's like,
Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes.
I guess he's acknowledging it.
Count 2, we, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment as to Quindarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of the attempted first-degree murder of Mary Harrison as charged. And
Oh,
did
he's
the
getting-
defendant personally
oh, he's
carry,
getting
display,
charged.
use, threaten, or attempt
Quindarius.
to use a firearm?
Right.
Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment as to Devontae Sampson. The defendant is guilty of attempted first-degree murder of Mary Harrison as charged.
So 4
We, the jury,
people.
find as follows as to count
Guilty.
2 of the indictment as to Jalen Bedward. The defendant is guilty of the attempted first-degree murder of Mary
Oh,
Harrison
that's
as
it.
charged.
All 5 guilty.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment as to Andrew Thompson. The defendant is guilty of the attempted first-degree murder of Mary Harrison. And did the defendant personally carry, display, use, threaten, or attempt to use a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant discharge
Everyone's
a firearm?
filling out the
Yes.
forms.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment as to James Denson. The defendant is guilty of the attempted first-degree murder of Mary Harrison as charged.
Oh shit, they're
And
slapping on
did
the
the
second
defendant personally
charge
carry,
now.
display, use, threaten,
Everyone's
or
gonna
attempt to use a
slap
firearm?
with the second charge
Yes.
now.
Did the defendant actually possess a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes. Count 3, we, the jury, find as follows as to count 3 of the indictment as to Quindarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of attempted first-degree murder of Willie Brown as charged.
Count
And
3.
did the defendant personally
3
carry,
charges
display,
right there.
use, threaten, or attempt to use a firearm? Yes. Did the defendant actually possess
It looks
a
like
firearm?
all of them got
Yes.
tagged with it.
Did the defendant discharge a firearm? Yes. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 3 of the indictment as to Devontae Sampson. The defendant is guilty of the attempted first-degree premeditated murder of Willie Brown as charged. Count 4, we, the jury, find as follows as to count 4 of the indictment as to Quindarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to
There it
count
is,
4
count
of the
4.
indictment as to Devontae Sampson. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 4 of the indictment as to Jalen Bedward. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 4 of the indictment as to Andrew Thompson. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree
Oh man,
murder
everyone's
as
getting
charged.
slapped with it.
We, the
dude.
jury, find as
That's
follows
it.
as to count 4 of the indictment as to James Denson. The defendant
It
is
took
guilty
it took
of conspiracy to
14
commit
hours
first-degree
for
murder
all
as
of them
charged.
to agree. Yep, they all did it.
Count 5, we, the jury, find as follows as to count 5 of the indictment as to Quindarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of shooting at, within, or into a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 5 of the indictment as to Devontae Sampson. The defendant is guilty of shooting at, within, or into a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 5 of the indictment as to Jalen Bedward. The defendant is guilty of shooting at, within, or into a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 5 of the indictment as to Andrew Thompson. The defendant is guilty of shooting at, within, or into a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 5 of the indictment as to James Denson. The defendant is guilty of shooting at, within, or into a vehicle as charged. Count 6, we, the jury, find as follows as to count 6 of the indictment as to Quindarius Hammond. The defendant is guilty of discharge of a firearm from a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 6 of the indictment as to Andrew Thompson. The defendant is guilty of discharge of a firearm from a vehicle as charged. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 6 of the indictment as to James Denson. The defendant is guilty of discharge of a firearm from a vehicle as charged. So say we all, dated this 17th day of September 2025, signed
All
for pursuant of the
7
jury.
or 6
The
charges?
attorney's like the jury polled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Madam Clerk.
Juror number 1, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 2, is this your true and correct verdict? Juror number 3, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 4, is this your true and correct verdict? Juror number 5, is this your true and correct verdict? Juror number 6, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 7, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 8, is this your true and correct verdict? Juror number 9, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 10, is this your true and correct verdict? Juror number 11, is this your true and correct verdict?
Polling the jury
There it
guilty on
is.
all counts,
All
all 5 defendants.
12 said yes. All 6 accounts. All of them got tagged with it. Right, so there you have it. They were, right, they were all in on it. They were all accomplices. They were, right, they all had some form or fashion in, right, in the shooting. So they all got tagged. There you have it. And then what's this? Plane predator repeatedly groped teen during 3-hour flight.
Federal
Oh, shit.
prosecutors say a teenage girl flying
Yeah, I
from
saw
Anchorage,
this.
Alaska,
This was, what, 2 days ago.
to Seattle, Washington, ended up being seated next to a predator. Well, now the man who
Yeah, it
molested her
happens.
during that flight, he's going to prison.
Yeah,
We're
on-
sitting
on
down with an
plane
attorney
flights,
who
yeah, you
litigates
might
on
be
behalf of
sitting next
sexual
to a
assault
predator.
survivors to analyze
There's a
these types of
possibility.
cases. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A 28-year-old man from the tiny town of Deering, Alaska, is headed for prison after prosecutors say he went to extreme
Oh,
lengths
he was from
to touch the
Alaska.
body of a teenager
Interesting.
seated next to him on a flight from Alaska to Washington. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington says Trayton Chaz Ballott's incredibly inappropriate behavior happened on an Alaska Airlines flight from Anchorage to Seattle-Tacoma in January.
Yeah,
of
that
this year.
cabin
And
fever.
instead of continuing on his
He
way
was
when
going
Flight
wild.
190 landed, he was arrested. Okay, got to talk about this. And to talk
He
about
was-
this,
he was
the
a horn
disturbing
dog,
details
apparently.
in this federal complaint, I want to bring in John Clune, civil attorney who litigates on behalf of survivors of sexual assault. John, thanks so much for coming on. One of the scariest things about this is obviously where it happened, right? The victim was seated toward the back of the plane in a window seat. Ballot was apparently sitting next to her in the middle. Almost nowhere for this girl to go. Have you seen something like this before?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, some of these cases out of airplanes are becoming more and more common. I'm not sure that the behavior is becoming more common, but at least the reporting of it is becoming more common. And a lot of times it's that window seat because, as you mentioned, you're really kind of trapped there, particularly for, somebody of her age.
Yeah, trapped there. There's nowhere to go, but also so brazen, right? That is a semi-public area. It's close quarters. You can hear everything. You can see everything.
Yeah, and a lot of times there are offenders that are attracted to these opportunities to commit offenses when there are a number of other people around them and they have the ability to get caught. It's part of the deviant mindset of some of these guys. So not surprising, but incredibly disturbing.
What happened? Okay, let's get into what happened. Well, once law enforcement got word about an incident on the plane, that's when the FBI took over the investigation. By the way, let me just start right there. John, is that strange for the FBI to take hold of this, or does that make sense given you're talking about an airplane?
Yeah, because when you have cases that happen on, say, a Amtrak train or a bus, you can use the local jurisdiction as the location for the prosecution and investigation. But when it's on an airplane, it's going to almost always be federal law enforcement and federal laws are going to apply. So that's normal.
Okay, so according to the investigating agent's report for the criminal complaint, it states, quote, the FBI has been designated as the law enforcement agency responsible for investigating crimes that occur on board an aircraft once the doors have closed, post-boarding, including interference with a flight crew or any physical or sexual assault. Again, it makes sense. The FBI investigates crimes that cross state lines and a flight would qualify. Then you go to January 15th. The teen, who's referred to as Minor Victim 1 or MV1 in the court filing, had a stranger seated next to her. The complaint reads, MV1, who is 17 years old, was traveling with her mother and a friend. MV1 was sitting in the window seat with Ballot seated in the middle seat immediately adjacent to MV1 and MV1's friend sitting in the aisle seat. About an hour into the flight, Ballot, who appeared to be asleep, moved his hand onto MV1's upper and inner thigh and began rubbing her thigh. MV1 moved his hand away. A short time later, Ballot again put his hand on MV1's inner thigh and began rubbing. Again, MV1 moved his hand away. A few minutes later, Ballot again put his hand on her inner thigh. MV1 again pushed it away. So, John, Ballot tried this again and again and again. And I wonder if the
Jesus.
goal was, hey, I'm
That is
sleeping, I'm not
vicious.
realizing what I'm doing or where I'm going. Is that what the goal was here?
I mean, to kind of mask it as though his hands are just kind of wandering in their sleep. Maybe. I mean, one of the ways that offenders can get away with their crimes is to engage in behavior that's not overt. It can be confusing to the victim. You know, is this person half asleep and not knowing what's going on? Should I make a big deal about it? Because if somebody just flat out, reaches over and sexually assaults somebody in an airplane seat, they're probably going to yell out. They're probably going to like call for help. So if you engage in behavior that's a little more confusing to the victim, you have a higher likelihood of getting away with it. So that could be part of the motive.
And it can be uncomfortable calling the flight attendant over and starting a whole scene, but it's just so disturbing and so unsettling. And it makes you wonder how brazen it is. Do you think it is possible he has done something like this before and just no one reported it and he didn't get caught?
I mean, to use your word, it is such brazen behavior. It seems that it's unlikely that it's the first time. We don't know of any other instances, but it is pretty bold behavior, and that's usually a sign of somebody who's gotten to a certain level of comfort with committing offenses.
By the way, here on Sidebar, we talk about emergency situations a lot, but what we don't talk enough about is how to prepare so you can face anything with confidence. Did you know that falls are one of the leading causes of injury for older Americans? Yeah, 1 in 4 experiences one each year, and getting help fast, that can make all the difference. That is where Medical Guardian comes in. And if you think you already know what a medical alert device is, think again. Medical Guardian continues to innovate, making them sleeker, easier to use, faster than anything you may have seen before. They offer devices your way, around your neck, on your wrist, clipped to your belt, so protection fits seamlessly into your daily life. These devices work nationwide with 4G LTE and Wi-Fi, connecting you instantly to 24/7 US-based emergency operators who already know your name, where you are, who to call. They can send emergency services and notify your loved ones, whether it's a fall, a sudden allergic reaction, a car accident, any type of emergency. And with optional fall detection, they can even call for help automatically if you can't press the button yourself. So right now, Medical Guardian is offering our viewers an exclusive 75% off of their top-rated MG Mini and MG Mini Lite, because being prepared, it's not about fear. It's about living your life without limits, knowing help is always within reach. So visit medicalguardian.com/sidebar75, use code sidebar75 or DDS75 today to claim your 75% off. Does the airline have responsibility here?
They probably don't have legal liability here. They could have liability if there's some reason why they should have known that this was going on. Some of the cases that we see where the airlines have liability is when there was a report that was made to somebody and that report was ignored and then the abuse continued. That doesn't seem like it's the case here, so perhaps not.
Now, we looked into Ballott's criminal history in Alaska and Washington, and in November of 2016, he pled guilty to assault in the 4th degree out in Alaska. The exact details about it weren't available on the court website. But in July of 2018, he was charged in Seattle Municipal Court with harassment. There was no criminal complaint that was filed. It appears the case was dropped. And then in May of 2022, he was charged with violating a domestic violence protection order. That case apparently is still making its way through Alaska's judicial court system. John, an airline is not responsible for knowing somebody's criminal history and whether or not they should be monitoring them, watching them on the plane. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, they really don't, other than things that may put them on a do not fly list, which is probably more of a TSA issue. The airlines don't have any obligation to vet their passengers. I mean, they do have some obligation to be mindful and pay attention to what's going on in their airplane. But again, they have to have some reason to know that something's going on and then fail to act before they're going to have any real responsibility.
We go back to this federal complaint. It reads, MV1 then placed a pillow on her thighs and put the tray table down over the pillow. Ballot moved his hand under the armrest and tried to place his hand under the pillow and over her thigh. MV1 pressed down on the pillow to stop him. He pulled his hand away. And the prosecutor's office clarified in a press release about Ballott's conviction that it was actually a stuffed animal she used, not a pillow, which is just another reminder that this is a minor we're talking about. MV1 then took out her phone, typed a message indicating that the man next to her had touched her, and got up to show her mother the message, who was seated in the row behind her. MV1 also showed her friend the message. Now, John, quick thinking. I think that it was really, really smart for her to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in general, it doesn't seem like 17-year-olds are the best targets for offenders that are looking to get away with things. I mean, this 17-year-olds are pretty high functioning at that age, but I give her a lot of credit for thinking of something, a discreet way to alert her mother without kind of blowing things up in a way that might have felt unsafe or scary to her, given the fact that she was kind of pinned in that position.
How important is it to have other people with her, right? Corroborating witnesses for a legal case, because if I told you that somebody molested somebody on a plane, touched somebody inappropriately on a plane, you would think that seems so impossible. How on earth? There must be a misunderstanding here. If someone would do that, unfortunately,
I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, there's some sickos
so is it
out
very,
there.
very important to have eyewitnesses, corroborating witnesses, supporting witnesses there?
It is.
I mean, you would think people would,
either you're
keep
traveling
them,
by yourself or you're not traveling next to people that are close to you, and so it is just your word against somebody else's word.
People,
the fact that she did that with the phone and shows it to her mother, that's
when
incredibly
you step
compelling
outside,
what's the rationale for why the 17-year-old is showing her mom this text message, other than this actually did happen? So that was really important evidence.
Let's go back to the filing. It says, quote, her mother told her to let the flight attendants know. MV1 got up and tried to shake Ballot, who still appeared to be asleep, to ask him to move so she could get out of the row. He did not appear to awake, and she moved past him to get out of the row. Now, John, we know how small these airline seats have gotten, how close together people are. You can't really move, especially from the window seat. The other people don't get up, so it's like you have to literally climb over to get help. That's a really frightening thought.
Yeah, and I think at this point, fortunately, I think the gig is up. We have the flight attendant who's over helping her at this point. So, but it just is a reminder of just how trapped you can be in that window seat.
Then the report continues, quote, she then found the flight attendant and reported what had happened. The flight attendant moved her to another seat. MV1 did not consent to Ballot touching her thigh at any point in the flight. John, we know the flight crew reported the assault to law enforcement on the ground. At SeaTac, Ballot was arrested. Was there anything else the flight attendant could have done?
At that point, I mean, you're not gonna restrain the person, and you're trying to maintain some sense of order on a plane. You got to keep in mind you have all these other passengers that are either don't know what's going on, or if they know what's going on, they don't want a scene. They don't know if this person's a dangerous individual. Is he going to react differently if he's confronted?
They don't know
So
he
at
has
this
some
point, it
kind
sounds
of
like the protocol was followed,
they
which
checked
was
if
to
they
remove
did.
the threat to the
He
other
had
passenger, and then
weapons
I'm sure they continue to monitor Mr. Ballot.
And what kind of training do flight attendants get other than, everything that goes into how to prepare for a plane and emergencies? Is there sexual assault training? Is there other inappropriate behavior training in terms of when you're dealing with passengers who are unruly or maybe committing a crime? Again, sexually assaulting somebody. Do they get any kind of training? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It certainly seems like between sexual assault and all the other things we see with unruly passengers that we all have the benefit of watching thanks to phones and social media. I'm sure there is, but I don't know what that is.
So Ballot was indicted on one count of abusive sexual contact. The complaint reads, Trayton Ballot did knowingly and intentionally engage in sexual contact with minor victim 1, that is, touch minor victim 1's inner thigh multiple times without minor victim 1's permission, and with the intent to abuse, humiliate, degrade, and arouse and gratify the sexual desire of any person. Does that feel like the appropriate charge based on that pattern of facts?
It does, yeah. And you notice that it's not sexual contact with any particular sexualized body part or reproductive organs, but any kind of contact of any nature that's done for the purpose of that sexual gratification is going to apply.
Brushing
So
up
the right
on
count.
someone's
John, according to prosecutors, this jury, they deliberated
basically
for about
molesting
an hour
is
before convicting him.
the
Is that surprising to you?
It's short,
right
but
intentional
the evidence seems
the
pretty strong
sexual
here.
act
So
of
I'm not
trying
surprised,
to
but it's just a
purposely
short period
touch
of time
someone
for a serious verdict.
My understanding also is
right,
that this charge carries a sentence of up to
Sexual
2 years in prison if he were to get that much. Is that long enough?
Something like that, right?
It certainly doesn't feel like it. I mean, you're sexually assaulting a child in a pretty bold and brazen way. Sometimes particularly with federal charges, keep in mind that normally sexual abuse cases are filed under state charges. So we have a whole different range of options and probably longer lengths of punishment under state charges because that's just normally the system that we use for sexual abuse. Feds have fewer charges to choose from. And so this was, although the right one, may not be one that gives enough punishment, for the crime, especially with the prior assault conviction.
Is this going to deter behavior like this in the future?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, what we've seen with sex offenders is punishment generally does not equate to deterrence. Hopefully there is sex offender specific counseling that he gets while he's in prison that has some limited
well, they
benefit
get their
to
names
it,
on the
as much as
fucking
anything,
wall,
it's just a
right?
punitive aspect for
Fucking
bad
sex
behavior. Whether it actually fixes or prevents other assaults is probably less the focus.
And this is not an isolated incident. According to FBI stats from 2023, airport liaison agents, they opened 96 cases related to in-flight sexual assault. And earlier this year, a woman identified as Barbara Morgan filed a lawsuit against American Airlines, alleging that the company allowed a passenger with a known history of misconduct to sexually assault her on a flight last year.
That's crazy.
She was seated next to Cherry and Abraham.
Usually people who are sex offenders, usually they're flight risk and they can't go on flight.
The DOJ charged Abraham with abusive sexual conduct. His case is ongoing.
Like,
John, aside from the stats that are quite alarming,
that guy
does this case feel different? Does the Abraham case feel different, where an airline could be liable?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the concept of, what's the airline's duty to make sure that people are safe on their airplanes. So far, with cases that have been out there, there's not been any finding that airlines have a duty to vet their passengers just generally before they're on their flight. So the fact that they have this prior history of conduct, unless it's, somehow on the same airline, then they're probably not going to have liability for that. But if, again, if there's something that the staff notices during the flight and then they don't respond to it, then there can be liability. But it's certainly, the Abraham case is certainly a more aggravated series of facts given the history.
But that's not flagged by an airline, right? If you have a guy who is doing this on airlines before or has engaged in this kind of conduct, it's just not flagged. It's just not on the record. By the way, you dealt with a
airlines don't
bus, right?
I did.
Don't post their picture or something.
Well, at least she was 9 at the time, and there was a mom traveling with her 2 kids, and mom sat on one side of the, it's 2 seats on the side on a Greyhound bus. Mom sat with one kid, and then her other kid was just across the aisle, so only about a 1.5 feet away from her. And unfortunately, the person sitting next to that kid was a previously convicted sex offender who repeated his behavior on her.
And what happened? What happened with the case?
So it was an interesting case because we didn't know who the person was because it wasn't reported by the kid until later that night. But remarkably, they were able to find who the individual was. He went to trial and he was convicted and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Similar type of touching to what we have in this underlying case.
And what
So
about
they
Greyhound?
got
What was
that
their take
for-
on what happened?
So they didn't make any statements. I was a prosecutor at the time, so I didn't deal with Greyhound. But I don't know that Greyhound had any particular liability there, but certainly a disturbing set of facts.
I don't know what's going on. It's crazy. It's crazy to be thinking about. John Clune, thank you so much for taking the time. Sorry this is the case that we're talking about, but clearly, unfortunately, you have experience in this area. You see this happening.
Crazy
on
shit
different
happens.
modes
I
of
mean, there's
transportation.
obvious.
Just
There's
everybody try to be safe out there. I don't,
right,
know I don't even know how to prevent something
even
like this,
people
but
trying
John,
to
thank you so much.
fucking stalk people.
Good good to see you.
All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on
Trying to
Sidebar.
post
Thank you
up
so
with
much for joining us. As always,
cameras
please
or
subscribe on
trying to
YouTube,
put, like,
Apple Podcasts,
Apple
Spotify, or
AirTags
you should get
to
the
track
podcast. You can
them
follow
and
me
shit.
on Instagram or X. I'm Jesse Weber. See you next time.
Yeah, gotta be careful. There's some fucking crazies out there. Anyways, there you have it. Long crime and right AV to the 7th power.